When you hear the name Hiruzen Sarutobi, what comes to mind? The god of shinobi, the man praised as a living legend, revered for his unparalleled wisdom, his strength, and his leadership that guided the Hidden Leaf through the toughest of times. He's the Hokage, a symbol of power, unity, and protection. Generations of shinobi and villagers looked up to him, trusting that he would always be there, guiding them, keeping them safe from the dangers that lurked beyond their walls. But what if I told you that the same man who stood as the pillar of the Hidden Leaf failed one of the most important people in it? A failure so deep, so tragic that it stained the legacy of the Hokage. Naruto Uzumaki, the child of prophecy. The son of the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, the child who carried the weight of the village's future within him. But what did he receive from the one who promised his parents they would protect him, raise him, and ensure he was loved? Neglect, loneliness, a life spent shunned by the very village his father gave his life to protect. You see, Hiruzen Sarutobi is a man who earned the title of God of Shinobi, but where was his godlike protection for Naruto? Where was the love, the guidance, and the compassion that a Hokage should have given to Minato and Kushina's son? Minato's final wish was clear: to have Naruto treated as a hero, to give him the recognition he deserved for the sacrifice his parents made. But that wish was ignored. Hiruzen promised to care for Naruto, to raise him with the same care he gave to his own students. But as the years passed, Naruto was left to grow up alone, hated by the villagers who were supposed to protect him. This brings us to the central question: did Hiruzen fail to protect Naruto because he couldn't? Was it a matter of his old age, his political position, or the burdens of his role as Hokage? Or was it a conscious choice, a decision to turn a blind eye, to ignore the promises he made in the face of his duty? As we dive deeper into Hiruzen's actions, or lack thereof, we'll uncover the truth behind this mystery. Did the god of shinobi truly fail Naruto, or did he simply choose not to care? Let's break down the cold, hard facts and peel away the layers of excuses. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the so-called god of shinobi, had a front row seat to Naruto's suffering, and the more we look, the more it becomes painfully clear this wasn't a case of him not knowing, it was a matter of choosing not to care. First, let's start with the simplest truth. Hiruzen was aware of the hatred towards Naruto. It's not just something implied. The manga and databooks explicitly state that the villagers harbored deep animosity towards Naruto, seeing him as nothing more than the Nine Tails in human form. Hiruzen knew about it, he was not blind to it, and he certainly wasn't ignorant of the implications. In fact, the databooks make it clear that he even condoned the way the villagers treated Naruto, believing that he couldn't interfere without risking chaos. But this, right here, is where Hiruzen's choices come into question. Naruto was left alone in an unforgiving world. The man who was supposed to protect the village's future, to be a beacon of hope and leadership, failed to protect Naruto's basic human dignity. He allowed the boy, who was the son of the fourth Hokage, his own comrade, to be isolated and shunned. How does a Hokage, who should be at the forefront of ensuring unity, watch as a child, the son of a hero, is emotionally destroyed? Consider the instance when Naruto was actually attacked by villagers, a direct assault on his life. Was there any immediate protection? In fact, the Hokage did nothing to stop this. The databooks and manga confirm that after the attack, the villagers were not reprimanded, and Naruto was once again left to fend for himself. Hiruzen could have issued an order to stop this behavior, to protect Naruto, to remind the villagers of what the child represented. But instead, he did nothing. He chose to let Naruto suffer in silence, alone, because it was easier that way. Another glaring example of Hiruzen's inaction is when Naruto was enrolled at the Ninja Academy. We see how Naruto's classmates, including Sasuke, were trained and guided by their parents or elders, supported and loved. Meanwhile, Naruto, he was left to struggle, constantly failing, with no one there to teach him how to channel his potential. Sure, Hiruzen had a hand in allowing Naruto to attend the academy, but where was the guidance, the mentoring, the leadership he needed as a child of prophecy? There was no plan in place to help Naruto succeed, despite the promise made by Minato and Kushina. Hiruzen was present at Naruto's birth, and he knew the significance of Minato's final request, yet he did nothing. Hiruzen's inaction wasn't just about neglecting Naruto emotionally. It was about failing to use his political power to change the system that was hurting Naruto. The people feared him. Hiruzen knew that. He could have stood up against the village's prejudice. He could have stood at the front and publicly proclaimed Naruto's significance, but instead, he chose to maintain the status quo. He allowed the villagers to hate and fear Naruto without ever giving him the tools or resources to prove his worth. These aren't isolated instances, they are a pattern, and it raises the ultimate question: did Hiruzen fail to protect Naruto because he couldn't, or did he simply choose not to? Because if we look at the facts, the answer isn't as clear-cut as many want to believe. Hiruzen could have made different choices. He could have chosen to fight for Naruto's future, he could have chosen to be the father figure Naruto never had, but ultimately, he didn't. He allowed the very foundation of Konoha to fail one of its own, and that is something we cannot simply brush aside. Now let's talk about the excuses, the ones that everyone seems to love to give Hiruzen. He was old, they say. He was wise, they say. His hands were tied, they say. But let's be real for a second. These excuses don't hold water when you dig into the reality of what he chose to do, or rather, what he chose not to do. It's easy to label Hiruzen's failures as signs of his weakness. He was old, yes, but he still had the power of the Hokage. He still held the fate of Konoha in his hands. But when it came to Naruto, he didn't use that power, he chose not to use it. He sat back in his comfortable, idealistic vision of peace, letting the suffering of a child continue without lifting a finger. Does that sound like weakness? Or does it sound more like complacency? Hiruzen prided himself on his wisdom. His God of Shinobi title wasn't just for his strength, it was about his ability to read situations, his ability to lead Konoha through the most turbulent times. And yet, when faced with the reality of what was happening to Naruto, the very son of the fourth Hokage, a living symbol of Konoha's future, he did nothing. If he truly had the wisdom he was known for, he would have recognized the emotional toll this neglect was taking on Naruto. He would have seen that by allowing the village to ostracize him, Hiruzen was letting the cycle of hatred and loneliness fester in the heart of the village itself. And yet, instead of stepping in, instead of being the Hokage that Naruto needed, he allowed that cycle to continue. Why? Was it really because he was too old, too tired to make the hard decisions? Or was it because Hiruzen, who loved the idea of unity above all else, was too passive? Was he too caught up in his own idealism of maintaining peace at any cost, afraid that if he intervened too forcefully, the villagers might rebel or the delicate balance of Konoha might collapse? The emotional weight here is undeniable. Let's break it down. Hiruzen knew the pain Naruto was going through. He didn't need to hear it from others. He saw it with his own eyes. He saw Naruto struggle with loneliness, with rejection, with unimaginable pain. And yet, for all his wisdom, Hiruzen never took the necessary steps to ease that pain. He never made the difficult choice to break from tradition and speak openly about Naruto's true heritage, the legacy he carried. He never made the choice to protect Naruto like he protected other members of his village. And don't get it twisted. This wasn't a case of he didn't know what to do. He knew exactly what he was doing, he just didn't do it. Could he have been helpless? Could his hands have been tied in such a way that he couldn't make a difference? I don't believe so. He could have taken action, he could have taken a stand, but instead, he let Naruto suffer because it was easier. It was easier to stick with his vision of the village than to address the uncomfortable reality of what Naruto was going through. And here's the kicker. Hiruzen knew exactly what Naruto was capable of. He knew that Naruto was a child of prophecy. He knew the potential that Naruto held, both as a person and as a shinobi, yet time after time, Hiruzen chose to let him be the village's scapegoat, the boy who could never escape his father's shadow. So, was it his weakness, or was it his choice to do nothing? Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like a choice. Now let's get to the heart of it, the real reason why Hiruzen failed Naruto. It wasn't just weakness, it wasn't just age, and it wasn't just him being too tired. No, the truth is darker, more complicated, and infinitely more painful than we want to admit. It was fear, complacency, the burden of power, and a fundamental unwillingness to make the hard calls. Hiruzen had spent his entire life protecting Konoha, but somewhere along the way he became trapped in the very system he built. The Hokage, the leader of the village, is supposed to protect everyone, especially the most vulnerable. And yet, when it came to Naruto, Hiruzen allowed fear to cloud his judgment. What would the villagers think if he treated the son of Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage, like a hero? What would the other shinobi say if he gave special treatment to a child who carried the burden of the nine tails within him? This wasn't just about protecting Naruto's dignity, it was about image and power. Hiruzen was a man who valued the village's image over its soul. He was consumed by the politics of the village, always worried about maintaining the delicate peace between the villagers, the shinobi, and the fragile alliances he had worked so hard to maintain. He feared that if he gave Naruto the love and protection he deserved, the villagers and the other shinobi would see him as weak. He feared they'd accuse him of showing favoritism, of undermining the very peace he was trying to preserve. So instead, he chose to let Naruto suffer in silence. And that is the hidden truth that stings the most. Hiruzen's failure wasn't just about neglect. It was about a conscious decision to prioritize the village's peace over the well-being of a child. He knew that by not taking care of Naruto, he was ensuring that the boy would continue to suffer. But for Hiruzen, it was a lesser evil. At least the villagers would remain placated. At least the shinobi wouldn't turn on him. At least there wouldn't be any friction. But at what cost? Now imagine this, a child left alone, hated by everyone, with no one to turn to, and yet he carries the legacy of his parents, the very parents who gave their lives to protect this village. Imagine the emotional pain Naruto must have gone through, knowing that he should be celebrated as a hero, should be loved, yet he was cast aside, left to fight his battles alone. Imagine waking up every day being reminded of the people you can never truly know, Minato and Kushina, the ones who gave their lives for you, but who you can never truly connect with because the world despises you for what they did. And the worst part, it didn't have to be this way. Hiruzen didn't have to let this happen, he didn't have to let Naruto endure that suffering alone. But Hiruzen let it happen. He let the child of prophecy, the son of the fourth Hokage, carry the weight of the world on his shoulders alone, and for what? For peace? For an illusion of calm that could have been shattered the moment Naruto was finally given the love and care he needed. Hiruzen chose the village over Naruto, plain and simple. The painful truth is that he valued the stability of Konoha more than the life of the boy who was meant to be its future. The consequences of Hiruzen's neglect didn't just fade into the background of Naruto's life. No, they shaped him. They molded him into the person he would become, not because he was destined for greatness, but because he had no choice but to survive in a world that hated him. From the moment he could walk, Naruto was abandoned, not just by the villagers, who treated him like a walking curse, but by the very man who was supposed to protect him, his Hokage, his father figure. Hiruzen's indifference became Naruto's prison. He was left to fend for himself, year after year, struggling against loneliness and the cruel treatment of the villagers who resented him for something he had no control over. Every day was a battle for Naruto. Every glance, every whisper behind his back, every door slammed in his face. Each one was a reminder of the reality he faced. The villagers didn't just hate him, they feared him. But what made it even worse? The one person who should have been there for him, the one person who had made a promise to his parents, was nowhere to be found. Hiruzen was silent, passive, and absent. Imagine the deep pain that Naruto felt year after year, believing that his parents had abandoned him. He had no way of knowing that Minato and Kushina's final wish had been for him to be cared for, loved, and accepted by the village. Instead, Naruto was left to wonder why his parents would have left him to such a fate. He was never told the truth. He never knew the depth of the sacrifice his parents made, and instead, he grew up in the cruelest of ironies, the child of two heroes cast aside by the very world they protected. But the deepest tragedy is that Naruto could have known love. He could have known the warmth of a family, the security of being protected. Hiruzen had the power, the influence, and the responsibility to change it all. But he chose not to. There were so many missed opportunities. The people around Naruto, his sensei, the villagers, the ninja council, could have stepped in, but they didn't. And Hiruzen, he stood by, watching it all happen, his hands tied by the same fear and complacency we talked about earlier. What if, instead of the cold indifference, Naruto had felt the genuine care of his Hokage father figure? What if Hiruzen had taken him under his wing, showed him that the village was his home, and helped him embrace his legacy instead of shunning him for it? What if he had been a father, not a figurehead, not a leader, but someone who loved and protected Naruto like a son? Could you even imagine the impact that would have had on Naruto's growth? Naruto might have been able to trust others sooner, open his heart to his friends, and build stronger relationships. He might have had more confidence in himself, knowing that there was at least one person who truly cared for him, but instead, he was left to fight against a world that didn't even want to give him a chance. Hiruzen's failure wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a betrayal of everything Minato and Kushina stood for. It was a betrayal of the trust they placed in him when they entrusted their son's future to his care. And the consequences of that failure are written in every tear Naruto shed, in every lonely night he spent under the stars, in every painful smile he forced when he wanted to break. This suffering, this loneliness, wasn't just some backdrop in Naruto's journey, it was the crucible that forged him, and the question remains, could Hiruzen have prevented it? Could he have saved Naruto from this pain? The answer is clear, he chose not to. Now we reach the most painful question of all. Could Hiruzen have changed? Could he have been the father figure Naruto so desperately needed, the protector he was supposed to be? Could he have stepped outside the boundaries of his duty and personal idealism to truly care for the child of prophecy, the son of Minato who bore the weight of an entire village's hate? The reality is painfully clear. No. Hiruzen had every opportunity to change, to make a difference, but in the end he chose not to. He chose to hide behind his position, to place the village's peace above the life of the child he was entrusted to protect. His inaction was not born out of weakness, nor was it simply a matter of circumstance. It was a choice to remain passive, to remain complacent, and to turn a blind eye to the suffering of a child who needed him the most. It wasn't that he didn't care. We can't deny that Hiruzen had love for Naruto in some small, distant part of his heart. But love is not enough. Caring is not enough. And when it comes to the well-being of a child, simply caring is never enough. A Hokage, a father figure, is called upon to act, to make hard decisions, to sacrifice for the greater good. And in Naruto's case, Hiruzen failed in every regard. His passive attitude wasn't one of wisdom, it was one of neglect. It wasn't a thoughtful choice, it was the easy way out. Imagine the weight of that final truth. In the end, Hiruzen wasn't just a victim of circumstance, he wasn't some helpless bystander caught in the tides of fate. No, Hiruzen was a man who made the conscious decision to turn his back on the one person who needed him most. He chose to leave Naruto to fight the world alone, to face the bitterness and hatred of the villagers with no one to back him up. He chose not to be there for Naruto in his most vulnerable moments, and that choice, that act of turning his back, that is the most tragic part of all, the legacy of a man who was once known as the god of shinobi, revered for his wisdom and leadership, was forever marred by the simple truth. He chose to ignore the child who needed him. He chose to let Naruto suffer when he could have been the one person to show him that the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. Hiruzen Sarutobi will always be remembered as a great leader, a symbol of the will of fire. But beneath that legacy, there lies the painful truth. He failed the one person who needed him most. And in the end, that failure echoes louder than any of his accomplishments. The god of shinobi could have been so much more to Naruto. As we come to the end of this journey, let's pause and reflect on the true meaning of being Hokage. It's not just about strength, power, or being revered as a legend. It's about making the hardest choices, even when they go against the grain of what's easy or popular. It's about protecting those who need it the most, especially when they can't protect themselves. Hiruzen Sarutobi may have been hailed as the god of shinobi, but we now know that being a Hokage is about more than just skill in battle. It's about having the courage to do what's right for the village and for the people in it, even when it's the hardest thing to do, especially when it's the hardest thing to do. So I ask you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about Hiruzen. Was he truly a god among men, or was he just a man, too afraid to do the right thing when it really mattered? Let's not just remember the legend, let's reflect on the man behind it. And as we do, ask yourself, could Hiruzen have been the Hokage Naruto needed, or did he choose to turn his back on him when he was most vulnerable?